Warwick, hi, how you doing?
I'm really well, thanks, Guy. Really, really well.
Good, that's good to hear, especially considering current circumstances. I got to say that I'm really quite excited about today's tasting that we're going to have with you because there's a lot of unique things about Renegade, also about yourself. So I think that the best way to start the tasting is if you can run through your career right up to where we are today. If you can condense it, and then we'll get to trying some wines and yeah, carry on.
I don't know. I didn't. Where shall I start? So I run a business called Renegade. We're an urban winery in East London. We make about 38,000 bottles a year, all in a railway arch, just east of the city, near Shoreditch and Liverpool Street. And I started the business about 5 years ago. Well, 5 years in March. And before that, I used to work in asset management. So I come from kind of the finance investment side of the world before I started the business. The common belief is that people tend to make a lot of money in finance and then go into wine. That wasn't the case with me. I was never wealthy before I started this. I always seemed to work for the wrong company at the wrong time, or just leave a company before a massive deal that I'd worked on came in. So I didn't start Renegade as a wealthy person. I started it because I wanted to do something significantly different with my life. And I thought there was a real space in the market for something different in the English wine world.
Sure.
And the thinking was that I'd seen the emergence of urban wineries in the States, especially. I mean, in New York, there's probably 7 or 8 at the moment. And there's probably, my guesstimate is, there's probably about 50 all over the US, from predominantly on the West Coast, from Washington State down to California, but also in Texas and also in Colorado, and obviously quite a few on the East Coast around New York. But the urban winery concept, isn't just for the States. I mean, there are 2 urban wineries in Paris. There's 1 in Brussels, 1 in Finland, 3 in Sweden. There's 1 in Marseille. There's 3 in Melbourne. I mean, and there was 1 in Hong Kong for a while. So the idea of making wine in cities, as bizarre as it seems on the face of it, is actually not that new, historic, really. And in fact, what the tradition of making wine has existed hundreds of years ago in London. And many people also don't realize that in Paris, a lot of vineyards in central Paris existed in the 17th, 18th, and early 19th century.
So
Yeah.
you're taking your cue from the Parisians then?
Well, I think, to be honest, the winemaking legacy and tradition in France is a lot more than it ever is in London. But yeah, I think, in fact, when I started this, I didn't know there was 2 in Paris, so I wasn't copying them. In fact, when I started it, I worked very briefly at an urban winery in Colorado, and I saw from them what they were doing on the winemaking front from Colorado-based fruit. And so when I started in London, it was really small scale. We have bootstrapped this business from day one. We've had no outside investment. We're not backed by big corporations. We're not backed by distributors or producers or any investment money. It's all been borrowings, and just bootstrap grunt work. And so when I started in 2016, I didn't come from a winemaking background. I came from a big background of drinking loads of wine. And I thought because I'd done sommelier qualifications, I thought I knew everything about wine because I could taste a Mosel Riesling from a Pfalz Riesling from a Clare Valley Riesling, and I thought I knew a lot about wine. And I think as a general consumer, I think I knew more than most. But I essentially knew quite a lot about drinking it and tasting it and appraising it from a consumption perspective. It became very clear when I started the business, and I knew it already, really, but I knew nothing about the making, And I think one thing that people often don't think about as much as maybe they should, in my opinion, is how wine is made rather than just where grapes are grown.
Sure.
But yeah, and so we started in 2016. We did a vintage of 7,000 bottles in total, using Italian-grown Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, English-grown Bacchus, English grown Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier for sparkling, and some Bordeaux grown Sauvignon. And when we started, I hired a really, really talented young winemaker from New Zealand called Josh Hammond, and we made our first wines. And we released them in 2017. They were good. They were nice wines. But
Yeah.
if I'm being brutally honest, they were nothing special, right? And the reason they were nothing special, apart from the fact that we were essentially kind of garage Easter, like bandit, almost like home style winemakers, but with better equipment and better barrels. The biggest reason that our wines weren't brilliant was that we were copycat winemakers. And when Josh first joined, one of the first things he said to me was, what sort of style of wine do you want to make? These are I'd already sourced the vineyards and I sourced the kind of grapes that we could use. He said, what sort of styles of wine did you want to make? And this is a guy that's done kind of like, 9 vintages. And my response was just like, good stuff, good. Like I wanted to make good wine. I didn't have a directional style in mind. I didn't have a style about whether we should be organic, low intervention, like wild ferment, unfiltered, how much sulfur we'd use. Would we use fine techniques? Would we use natural cork? Should we do oat wine? Should we force wines through malolactic fermentation? Should we chaptalize? Like all this stuff was literally gobbledygook to me, and it may well be to lots of people who were listening. But I essentially didn't have much of a clue about the making. I just knew, and I thought that wines tasted like they did just because that's where they were grown or made. And 5 years later, I've realized that that is not the case. Or it's a complicated conversation, at least. And again, please jump in with any questions. Otherwise, I'll go on a ramble, but that's fine. But essentially, in 2016, our wines were copycat wines. We would go to the vineyard in Herefordshire, we'd go to the vineyard in Bordeaux, and we would buy grapes and we'd bring them back to London in refrigerated trucks, all hand harvested, really high quality stuff. And we would do exactly what the vineyard in France or Lombardy or Herefordshire would do. Because we would ask them, what should we do with your grapes? And we'd copy them. And so essentially what we had in 2016 was we had wines that tasted and looked and smelt and felt just like the wines that came from the regions in question, but with a different label, a slightly different story, and a higher price point.
Yeah.
And essentially we got very immediate. Well, I as a pure punter, when I was looking at the feedback we got on the wines, it became very clear to me very quickly that we were doing something wrong. Like we shouldn't be copying styles, because if you really want a good Oltrepò Pavese Nero, Pinot Nero, buy one from Lombardy. If you really want an Entre-deux-Mers Sauvignon from Bordeaux, buy one. If you want traditionally made English style Bacchus and Herefordshire, talk to Three Choirs or 16 Ridges or whatever, And so in 2017, we just threw the book out the window and said, let's start making wines using the best grapes we can find, but looking at them differently and thinking about a modern palate and modern ways of making wine and why wines are made a certain way, and questioning everything, and questioning the use of inoculated yeast, questioning the use of sulfur, questioning barrel time, questioning wood types, questioning everything, and just saying, let's think about this, think about wine a little bit in the same way that craft breweries have thought about beer. They've said, let's use German malt, let's use New Zealand hops, let's use hot side, cold side hopping, let's use different filtration methods, and let's create new beer styles. I mean, New England IPA, West Coast IPA, double dry hopped beers, coffee stout. Like, these are not beers with 200-year traditions. They're modern styles. And so my view is there must be a willingness in the wine space. There must be a desire from some people who are a bit like me, who would like to see what can be made in wine rather than what's always been made.
So it's more about having the freedom, as you say, you're not stuck by rules. There isn't the regimentation that you can get in a lot of the areas where particularly there's a lot of history where they are confined to certain grape varieties and so forth. And that is the freedom that you have being an urban winery. Source grapes from all over the world, as you've said. and then you get to do what you want and have some fun. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing that I would say is that, I talk about the fact that I don't want to be too controversial, but let's be honest, England doesn't have a very long and deep tradition of winemaking like Italy or France, right, or even Germany. And it doesn't. So without these like dynasties of families making wines certain ways, certain styles, building up appellation-based guidelines, the UK essentially has the ability to present new things to customers without the shadow of tradition.
Sure.
Now, I'm not saying London's any different about the rules, because if you're in Burgundy or you're in Bordeaux or you're in the Languedoc, you can do exactly the same as us. The difference is, will there be a market for outside appellation style wines from different grapes? Because people associate these older regions with certain styles. And if you make something very bizarre, you're not falling in line with what people expect, and you may have a difficulty selling it. From my perspective, we were always going to be making something radical and different, so we might as well do it different from the beginning.
I think that's the perfect way to try some of these wines, Warwick. So where do you want to start?
Well, the irony, after all that spiel, the irony is we're actually going to start with a wine which is probably our most traditional. And the reason is that it comes from our first vintage of 2016.
Great.
And I guess to caveat this, we, as a general rule, don't make hardly any traditional method or English sparkling wine. Reason being, there are loads of people in England that are really good at it, whether it's Knight Timber or Chapel Down or Ridgeview or Langham or whoever it is, right? There are some established players with great fruit and great financial reserves to be able to make wines of this style, lay them down, and invest time and money into making them good. As a startup urban winery, we don't have that luxury. Most of our wines are fairly young styles, fairly easier drinking, less kind of time on lees and in barrel, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But we do every year we have a play. Every year we make 1,000 bottles of traditional method, and this was our first ever one, made in 2016. But I'll struggle to open it. So here it is in its.
Yeah, no, let's go.
Yeah, but I will.
Warwick, just talk to me a little bit about the bottles, because obviously these are not the normal, but there's a very unique design to these, isn't there?
Yeah, so it comes in like a metallic, really nice box, and it comes. So the bottle is, it's like a slightly more unusual champagne design. We use a pewter metal label. You can probably just about see there. It's the same guys who make the kind of Ace of Spades champagne labels. And essentially, because this is our love, our passion project part of the business, money was really no object. So we spent loads of money on good grapes, French oak barrels, expensive metal labels, swanky bottles, and all the rest of it. Just because we only make 1,000 bottles, and it was our kind of passion project.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so this was one of the first wines we ever made back from 2016. And what is it? It is, so it's fully English in that the grapes are in English and the winemaking is done in England. It comes from a vineyard in Suffolk. It's a Blanc de Noir 2016. So about 75% Pinot Noir, 25% Pinot Meunier. This was our first vintage, and all we had in our first vintage was a 100-litre wooden basket press. So this was pressed by hand by me and Josh about 20 times in a wooden basket press. And then the juice was transferred straight to French oak. So it was a wild ferment in French oak in 2016. Stayed in the barrel with batonnage for probably maybe like 10, 11 months.
Okay.
And then we transferred it to bottle, and then we aged it on the lees for about another 12 to 18 months. I think about 16 months. And it was all done, so fermentation wild, no sulfur, secondary fermented in bottle, no sulfur additions, no We basically didn't add anything at all. Only a little bit of riddling agent because we knew we were going to disgorge it. And it was aged. It was aged. Part of the fun of these wines, this is like the London sparkling range. Part of the fun of it is we always age these bottles somewhere interesting. So this wine was aged in what's called the Undercroft. Of a church in Spitalfields called Christ Church Spitalfields. Christ Church Spitalfields is if you know the architect, the Hawksmoor churches in East London. Christ Church Spitalfield is the beautiful one with the huge spire. Essentially, the story is that he spent all of his budget on that one church, and the other 25 are a bit crappy because that was his flagship one. But essentially, there is the church, then there's the crypt, and then under the crypt there's another room called the Undercroft. It's where they used to store a lot of dead bodies, like after the plague, in like lead-lined coffins. But the story was, we were given that space to age these wines in. So they were down there for all the time on lease. So yeah, God, it's funny to drink a wine in 2021 that we made almost 5 years ago. But the idea with these wines, so if we do traditional method or champagne method or English sparkling method or whatever you call it, the idea is to try and make them quite differentiated. Because we make very few, they're not cheap to make, so as a consequence they're expensive, but they're very limited volume, and they're often quite different. So we're not trying to play with the Night Imbers or Chapel Down or Lime Bay or whatever. Like, we're not trying to make really high quality, well balanced sparkling wines that are universal. We don't mind them being a bit directional and a bit unusual. And so, but yeah, I mean, I love this wine, but I also love English Blonde de Noir, and I like wines made this way. I like French oak. But
the main thing that immediately jumped out to me was what you've achieved with the palate. Sometimes English sparkling wines can be a little thin, or they need a bit more boosting, should we say. No, this is very full. There's a lot of depth there, very beautiful mouthfeel, lots of texture. There's a really nice balance between some of the citrus flavors and the more defined, mature flavors. It's the main thing was the mouthfeel, and the body of it was beautiful texture.
I really like that too. I like that too. Yeah. I mean, again, full. So it's barrel fermented wild, so you get that diversity and flavor profile from naturally occurring yeast rather than directional inoculated yeasts. And also it's barrel fermented, so it takes on that kind of maturity very early on. It's also gone through full malolactic, so all of that malic acid has turned to lactic acid, but you still get a nice acidity because in English grapes you've still got that tartaric that won't change. And as a producer, we don't. In the UK, you're allowed to take away that tartaric acid by using a deacidification technique. We don't do that, so it keeps that kind of like that slight tang to it.
I was just about to say, I think that's what's important, and it does have that nice tang. It's almost like a tart style to it, because you've got a lot of depth, and it's nice that the wine has an edge. And as you say, it's good to retain a lot of the identifiable features that make it an English sparkling wine. So you want that, and I'd really like to try this with some pate. I'd love that. I think.
I forgot. I prepared myself something actually. I've gone a bit unusually really poncy. I bought some oysters yesterday, and I just shucked one before we came on air. I haven't eaten it yet, so it's still there waiting for me. Look. So I mean, I'll cheers this to you, Guy, but it's for me, mate.
There you go for it.
But yeah. Anyway,
so that works.
I'm on my holidays, mate. This is like a holiday for me. But yeah, the other thing that I think has added a bit of texture. So we've made this London sparkling traditional method wine style 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. We've done 5 vintages. This is the only one we've released because we didn't have the benefit of time in the beginning. We had to basically sell it within 2 years to get any money back.
Yeah.
But the 17, 18, 19, and 20 will have at least 5 years on lease.
Okay.
And the 2017, which is a Pinot Noir Rosé sparkling, is aging in the Freemasons Hall in Covent Garden. We have free run of the cellars of Freemasons Hall. And then the 18 and 19s are aging in the cellars of Somerset House by the Thames. There's 26 wine cellars at Somerset House that we've been given, and so we age the wines. We age the wines there.
Is part of the reason for that due to temperature, like it's more stable? I think is the word I was looking for.
Well, you know what? I'm not very good at the bullshit. So the truth is, it gets it out of our space. Our winery is very small. It gets it out of our space. It gets it somewhere very stable in temperature. And the third thing is, it's actually quite a nice part of the story, you know. And whether you like it or not, the hardest part of wine in the UK and globally is the selling of it. And the more there is to the story, and the more it can resound with people, the better. And Londoners like old buildings that have some interest. And so yeah, it gets it out of our space. It's really stable temperature, and it's a nice part of the story. Well,
that's why we're doing this, is to hear the stories, is to find out more about the wine, so it all comes together. And most importantly, the other thing I was going to say about this wine, about why I think it's got a much more vintage, aged, and integrated flavor profile for a wine that's not had that much time on lees, is that we're in a railway arch with the tube underneath and the railway line above, and these barrels shake like hell when the train goes over. And so we essentially get batonnage par train every 3 or 4 minutes in the winery. So we get an awful lot of lees contact of the barrel with wine in barrel, which again protects against oxidation, retains the flavors, and gives it more palate weight quicker. I don't think, and I imagine there would be no other winemaker in the world who can claim to that the London Underground adds to the depth of their sparkling wines.
Yeah,
I think that's brilliant.
But if you're a believer in terroir, you know, and if you're a believer in every part of the process adds to the character,
absolutely,
you have to say that the location of the winery and the atmosphere around it. So for example, one thing is yeast. This wine is fully wild fermented, no additions of yeast. In East London, where we are, there are probably 20 bakeries, 30 breweries. I mean, there are so much creative and food and drink based businesses that are playing with yeasts and other things all the time, that, you know, who knows what yeast was the one that brought out the aromas in these wines. You know, who knows?
Well, it's a great story, and it's just, again, we keep mentioning that, but it does bolster it, and it's but I think most importantly, it's a good wine. It's a very enjoyable wine. So, you know, so the main thing I got was the mouthfeel and the texture, which was superb. And again, great to have it with some food, as we were saying. There was a lot going on there. Very pleasing. So yeah, thank you. I love it.
And I guess I forget about thinking about the wines and how we should describe them and sell them, but I think fundamentally, the thing that I have to try and tell myself is, to most people, and 99% of people in the UK and globally, the idea of a wine made in London is ludicrous. It's, for most people, it's ludicrous. And so the product has to punch well above its weight to either get their interest, or it has to punch above its weight so you'll get repeat customers. Because otherwise it's dismissed as a gimmick. And I honestly never wanted and don't want to build a business based upon a gimmick. And if people perceive that gimmick to be London, then that's not what we want. So we've always tried to make wines significantly more impressive than people would think, so that they'll try again and then come back.
The wine has to always stand up for itself. That's the whole point, particularly with English wines, because there's still a lot of people who don't know or you know, aren't that sure. The wines have to compete on the world stage. You know, so this many times, and they do. We all know that, but it is about getting it out there. And as you say, the most important thing is that you have made a sparkling wine that has quality, that has definition. That has got to be the forefront of everything that you do. And then it's great. You get to play around with the crips. You get to play, you know, all these other things. And so that's an important part of the entire winemaking process and your story. So
But it's funny. I mean, I think as well that the definition of success in the wine space, whether it be English wines or urban wines or whatever, is that I would if people can go to restaurants or shops or whatever and they see the brand or they know the wine and they buy it because they think they associate it with quality, and they don't think that much about where it's been made or where it's from, but they just know they're going to like it and the price point's right for that quality. I mean, so for example, I would love, for me, success for Renegade would be for people to know the brand and know it's really nice wine and have no clue it's made in England or in London, because they just associate it with a good wine.
Yeah.
And there are urban wineries around the world that have achieved that. So for example, there's one in Oregon called Bow and Arrow. It's sold through Le Cave de Perrin, the distributor. It's a great wine. It's made in downtown Portland, but no one really thinks about it because it's great wine. And there's one in California called Brock Cellars, sold by Robeson. And again, it's just a brilliant wine, but it's made just outside San Francisco in an industrial kind of airplane hangar. But again,
Well, it's down to the product. It's down to the final taste. So absolutely.
Yeah, and for me, sorry, mate. If you need to tell me to shut up and you've got to move on, I will. But the thing that I will say that, go on, mate.
Well, no, I was going to say we'll move on to the next wine, but finish what you're about to say, and then we'll do that. So
what I now say, because I am just a bunch of whatever you call them, like phrases. I think that talking about urban-made wine should become just like talking about urban-made beer. Now, for many people, especially in the southeast and in London, they don't think twice about talking in huge esteem about breweries like the Colonel, Howling Hops, Beavertown, Exale, Ansbach and Hobday, or even in Cornwall, like Verdon, or in Gloucestershire, Deya, or whatever, right? Like absolutely world-class breweries in the UK. And these beers are all English beers brewed by people in a place in the UK. The truth is, their brewers aren't necessarily English. Their hops are almost never English, and their malt may be half English. So I would say, just like the beers, what the UK does really well is create and make things out of the best things in the world, right? So they make some of the best balanced beers from the best hops, the best malt, by the best makers in the world.
Sure.
England, and what we're trying to do is the same thing. We're taking the best grapes, whether it be England or be France or Germany or Portugal, and we're using the best techniques to make a brilliant product. So controversially, this is what I'm getting to. Controversially, all of our wines are English, including the last one we're going to try that wasn't grown here, because wines are made and only grapes are grown. And to make great wine, it takes makers, not just growers.
But going on from the sparkling, that is with the English grapes. So that's,
Oh, is it? But is it? I don't know. So, but historically, the UK has made sparkling wines because obviously you pick them when they're on acid rather than when they're fully ripe. And because of temperamental weather and also our soil types, you are more likely to make a consistent, high-quality product by making sparkling, because grapes don't ripen as much, and it's just about being a cooler climate growing environment, right? But there are grapes and there are regions in the UK that are becoming, with climate change and with techniques and with investment, brilliant places to grow grapes. Predominantly, in my opinion, Essex, which takes us nicely on to the next one.
So, Warwick, where are we going next?
So we are going to Essex next. We're going to go and talk to Sarah. Sarah it's spelled S-A-R-A, but she pronounces her name Sarah. So if she says her name's Sarah. This is a Chardonnay, 2019 Chardonnay, grown in the Crouch Valley, so about 30 miles east of London. And it's 2019. Where shall I put her? I'll put her here. Let's bring her into the room.
Got quite a bold colour to it, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost, we fermented a portion of this on the skins. So it's fermented two ways: whole bunch pressed, transferred to oak for fermentation. We used a combination of old French oak barrels and new Hungarian oak. And then we did a portion on the skins and blended it back in post-fermentation into the barrels for aging. and it's bottled and delivered completely unfiltered. So you can see there by the color and the texture, it's a little bit hazy. And that is the case with 90% of our wines. Most of our wines are hazy. And the question is, well, why the hell would you ever leave a wine hazy? The reason is, when you filter a wine or when you fine a wine, you strip things out, whether it be texture or flavor. And if you can leave a wine a little bit hazy, those particles on your palate create a slightly bigger mouthfeel and a greater perception of depth. And also, particles also reduce your perception of acidity. So the slightly hazier an English wine, you can get away with a wine being slightly more acidic because your palate will, the turbidity of that wine will be perceived as less acidic if it's a bit hazy. But yeah, 2019, Essex grown Chardonnay, fermented and aged in new Hungarian oak and old French oak, no chaptalization, so no additions of sugar, no filtration, no fining, and all wild fermentation. It sounds really naturally like hipstery. Like I don't call ourselves a natural wine producer because we want to make really good wines. And people who define themselves as very natural often insist only on using certified organic or biodynamic grapes. We don't. We just want really, really well grown grapes. Often they're grown organically, but none of our growers are certified. So as a consequence, we don't say our wines are natural. Many people do, but in my personal opinion, this is a whole kettle of worms that we can explore. But in my opinion, no wine is natural. No wine is natural.
What? I mean, the immediate impression I had of it was how smooth it was, particularly on the tongue. Sometimes you get a very firm acidity. I didn't with this. I think it helps they've got it at the correct temperature to serve it, just below room temperature. But it's very, very smooth. As I said, that's the main thing I really, really picked up on. You get a lot of the fruit content. There's a lot going on there. Beautiful mouthfeel. But the main thing was the smoothness and a very nice, pleasing finish, because sometimes it drops off a bit quickly, some of the English wines. This was quite consistent, which was good.
Yeah, I think the length there is due to the quality of the grapes, essentially. So in Essex, a lot of the grapes are grown for still. So a lot of the wines that you get in England that are, say, Chardonnays or Pinots, they use the same vines they would be using for sparklings, but just let them hang longer, But there are certain clones of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir that are grown for still varieties, like Burgundian style varieties. And in Essex, they can do that because they have the microclimate to let them hang longer. And so I think you get that because that these are Burgundy Chardonnay still vine varieties that are meant for stills. Also, because of the skin contact component, you get a bit more length and mouthfeel. Also, because it's unfiltered, you get that. Also, because it's all gone through malolactic, you get that fuller creaminess. But it is still a little bit tangy. And for me, I think the thing that the UK should do more of is make styles that are more true to their place rather than copying. And I think that there's a potential, especially with Essex, to make a style of Chardonnay that is defiantly Essex. And for me, what that would mean is naturally higher acidity, naturally slightly low alcohol, and depending on how you make it with or without oak, it could be different. But I think that the UK, Essex has an opportunity to make a really interesting cold climate style of Chardonnay, and that's why lots of winemakers go to Essex. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are wineries in the UK that travel over 400 miles to drive to Essex to pick up their grapes for their vintage. So Essex is the cornerstone of English still wine, in my opinion. And if you look at the level of planting that's happening, everyone is planting there. The planting in Essex is ludicrous. It will literally be the Bordeaux of England in like 15 years' time. But again, if you want sparkling, go to East Sussex, go to Kent. Different soil, different climate, different game.
I'm amazed at how soft it is, because a lot of the English wines there, we're talking about acidity, we've been talking about defined edges to a wine and a crisp freshness, which is great. And I love that, particularly with the sparklings. You want that definition. I don't know if threw me is the right word, but what I find very, very interesting with this one was that it didn't have that, and it's this softness. It's mellow. It helps at something we mentioned earlier, that it's served at the right temperature. But I'm getting a wonderful texture, beautiful mouthfeel, and a really interesting. Again, it's the texture. That's what it is. It's the texture on the tongue and how all the fruits are playing with each other.
I'll tell you why I think that's the case of this wine versus many other English Chardonnays. And again, this is just my opinion. I'm open to criticism. But I think one of the reasons is almost all the wine in the UK that I've been exposed to is inoculated. Essentially, they add a yeast strain to juice. And you do that for lots of really good reasons. You do it firstly because those yeast strains that you add give you a flavor profile that you'll get. So it's consistent. If you're making a 16, 17, 18, 19 version of the same wine, if you use the same yeast, you'll get a directional outcome the same way from the juice. Also, yeast that you add to grape juice are being grown for a certain reason and are very strong. And those yeasts will push through problems with the wine, whether it be temperature or lack of nutrients or other things. And so that's firstly so what I'll say is most English still Chardonnays or most wines in the UK are inoculated with a yeast strain. That gives you a directional outcome, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I like those clean aromas. This wine is 100% wild, which means it's unpredictable beast. It's just, and my classic analogy is it's just like a sourdough. Like the way we make this wine is like a sourdough. You literally leave the juice and you see which takes off. The opposite is a white sliced, where you're adding a yeast and you're getting an outcome. The difficulty with wild yeast is they're unpredictable. You never know what you're going to get, and they're weaker. And so when temperature changes, it gets colder, or if alcohol gets higher and they struggle, they could die. And so and also vintage to vintage to vintage is more unpredictable because it's wild. So our 16, 17, 18, 19 Sarah, 20 Sarah may be quite different. So that's the first thing. We only use wild yeast. The second thing is it's mellow because it's barrel fermented. We use Old French oak and New Hungarian oak for 100% of this wine. None of this wine touches stainless steel. So it goes from juice to wine inside wood, which is micro-oxidized. So you get the softening effects of micro-oxidation and malolactic inside the barrel. So it matures and softens and develops much quicker. Now, the truth is that's expensive. Using really high quality French oak and even Hungarian oak, which is still expensive, is expensive. Putting it all into a 5,000 litre stainless steel tank and washing it out 3 weeks later is a more industrial, quicker, cheaper way of doing it. So essentially, as our business is very young, we want to over punch our weight. And as a consequence, we're willing to invest in oak and wild yeast and time and problems to try and make interesting wines. So
it's also about having what you're talking about and what your wines are showing is about having a definition and also a character, not wanting to be bland, not wanting to necessarily fit in. It's more about being defined and very focused within what you're doing. And that's a good thing. It's good to explore, it's good to experiment, and it's good to try these things to create a style. And that's what I'm picking up from you, Warwick. Is Renegade stands for certain things right from the get-go.
100%. And I think one thing that we've done over the last couple of vintages is we've started to make more and more like what I also call like Marmite wines, love them or hate them wines. because let's be honest, we could all go to the supermarket and spend £8 on a bottle of Malbec or a bottle of like cheap supermarket Sancerre, and it'll be fine. It'll be fine, right? You can give it to your mum. It's fine. How is it? Yeah, it's nice. There's most of the wine in the world is, it's nice, all right.
Forgettable.
If you are paying a certain price point and you want something that's made by hand with love by people who really care, you might as well make it distinctive. And And I would rather make really well made divisive wines than kind of like middle of the road wines, because there is a market for middle of the road wines, and that's the supermarket. So if you're going to make wines that have to be made, have to be charged at a certain price point because you're so small and you put so much care and love into it, you might as well make them interesting. And the consequence of interesting is divisive. And so a lot of our wines are divisive. And the good thing is that thankfully people are interested in trying wines that they've maybe never tried before. And so there is a community out there that's open-minded. And is a little bit more willing to pay above the average for the price point. But yeah, I think one thing that's happened is the conclusion from us has been over the last few years that we have to make wines that are distinctive.
I think that's the perfect way to move on to your next one.
Sure. Oh yeah. I'm gonna when we've done this, I'm gonna go back and drink all three tonight. That's why it's good doing it in the evening.
So Warwick, tell me about this wine and your label.
So this wine, it has the face of a man called Courtney. There he is, Courtney. Just to give people a background on why we put the faces on labels, it's simply the case that, like, let's be honest, to any brand like ours, the most important people in the entire world ever are our customers. So as a consequence, we put our customers on the bottles. And this is the way it works. Once a year, we reach out on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, social media, and we say, who wants to be on a bottle? If you want to be on a bottle, send us a picture, your name, your age, where you live, and what defines you, what you do, whether it's your job or unemployed or whatever, whatever. And so we make about 20 wines every year. We pick probably 10 new people every year. We put them on the bottles. And the twist is, if we make the same wine from the same vineyard using the same winemaking technique, the next year we put the same person on, but 1 year older. So this wine is Courtney. How old is he here? He's 24, right? Courtney, 24, freelance chef from Thornton Heath in South London. We love this wine, so we've made him again. And so I've just done the label. Courtney 25 is coming soon. So Sarah, we've made again. Courtney, we've made again. Lots of wines we only make once because either we don't get on well with the vineyard, or we don't like the final product in the mix, or there's loads of factors: demand, supply, price point, everything. But so Courtney again. Here's again back to my controversialness. Courtney is an English wine. You know why? Because it's made from grape to bottle in England. The raw ingredients are not English. The raw ingredients are Italian. I mean, these grapes were grown in Puglia in the south of Italy.
I'd ask you that. Okay, cool.
And again, if you look at it, it's light, medium bodied. This is a 2019. The grape variety is a grape called Nero di Troia. And
a really interesting mintiness on the nose, which I wasn't expecting.
This has, it has minty freshness, and I think it has a real kind of cardamom and slightly Parma violetsy nose.
Not expecting that. That's a really remarkable.
It's a really interesting wine. It's a great variety in a wine that we've made a few times now because we just find it so unique. And so the story with these grapes and this vintage and this wine is this: if you go to Puglia and you go around Bari, with this region in the heel of Italy, and you look at vineyards, you'll find things like Primitivo and other varieties that are very common to that area. And you'll also find Nero di Troia. And most producers in the south of Italy make this grape into a very tannic, structured, dark, raisiny style, almost Amarone in its complexity and depth,
sure.
and kind of like mouthfeel. And if you think about the world, I mean, Puglia is a really hot, dry poor part of southern Italy. and the grapes get very, very ripe. It's not unusual to see wines from this region nearing 15%, especially with climate change. And so, as an urban winery with no winemaking history or rules, we look at this fruit and think it's got a really interesting smell and taste. But what we don't want to make is an Amarone style Nero de Troya. So what about we go down there and we taste these grapes through the ripening process, and we choose to pick these grapes when they're slightly more acidic and slightly less ripe, and bring them back and make this wine in a more kind of new world Pinot way. So you destem by hand, you do a little bit of whole bunch, and you chill the fermentation down to slow down the fermentation, extract a bit more of the lighter colors and lighter aromas and less of the tannins. And then you press it off and barrel age it in good oak, almost like a Pinot. Essentially, what we're trying to do is we're trying to give an underloved, underappreciated, but high quality grape a different lease of life. We're taking it out of the orphanage, and we're saying, look, go and live in Bel Air. Let's see what a young pug from Puglia can do with an Eton education. It's kind of like, just try something else. So essentially, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say there are wine definitions, and I've never heard a definition or rather wine described like that going to Bella. I think that's amazing. I just wanted to interject because, this is a really, really interesting wine. And what was really remarkable is the sense of beetroot to it. There's still a lot of depth going on there. It's not too dark as well in colour. Lots of aroma.
No, not at all.
No, exactly. Really, really lovely mouthfeel, texture. But yeah, it's really quite interesting how it's like soft beetroot. That's what I'm getting. Really like sweet beetroot, and it's a very nice. Again, balance. Balance is always key within wine, and I imagine it's a much harder to achieve than people appreciate. But it's just I love how smooth.
Here's a funny thing. Depends how you make wine, because actually most of the wines made globally or quite industrially, the way you achieve balance in wines between sweetness, tannins, structure, acidity, microoxidation, all these things, the truth is, the horrible truth of it is that in 90% of wines that you drink, it's tinkered with by winemakers using additives. So if you want structure, you add tannins. You want acidity, you add acid. You want more alcohol, you add sugar. Like it's hard to make really good wines just using grapes. And I think this comes back to my whole point about making. Like the making of wine has been massively overlooked in the focus on terroir, on the focus on the grapes and the vineyard. But actually, most wines are made in the winery. As long as the fruit is decent, you can make a decent wine. Like it's one of those things. If the fruit's crap, you can make a decent wine. If the fruit's good, you can make a good to great. If the fruit's great, you can make a great to exceptional. But the tinkering with winemaking, I didn't realize this until we started making it. But winemaking is science. It's temperature, it's yeast, it's fermentation, it's contact, it's balance, all the rest of it. A lot of that can be played with artificially. The trouble is making wines like this where you don't muck around too much. And anyway, yeah.
Well, yeah, you allow the fruit, the terroir, everything that you put into it to come through. And that's where, as a winemaker, you have the influence, you have the ability to tinker, and that's where it is.
Yeah.
You're trying all these different things, whether it's wild ferments, whether, it's mallow, like there's a million and one things that you can do. But that's the purpose of the winemaker. Explore, have fun, develop wines, develop your style. And then you got to put them out there and go, hey, I made this. What do you think? So, and you're definitely doing that.
Yeah, and so so we changed our winemaker in 2018, 19 vintage, and we didn't change them because the other one was crap. Josh decided to go back to New Zealand. He's a lovely bloke. He's gone back to be a winemaker at a Blenheim Marlborough winery called Isabel. But we hired a new winemaker, an Italian guy called Andrea Bontempo. Andrea trained in Italy and Germany, and he did vintages all over the States and in Australia. And he came to us as a 27-and-a-half-year-old, I think, a few years ago. He's now 30. But essentially, he comes with Germanic technical ability, New World perspective, but the use of English and Old World grapes. And this wine is a classic example of the technique. So this wine, I've never seen this done before. And this is one of the things that I'm sure people will copy in the years to come. I always thought you either did a wild ferment or you did an inoculated ferment. You either added yeast to a grape or you didn't bother. With Andrea, we found out that actually you can do both. So with this wine specifically, when we got the grapes, we divided them into 2,000 kilo batches. And in one tank, we destemmed it all by hand, and we added a yeast strain that brings out the more floral freshness, fruitiness character of wines of this type. In the other tank, we did a wild ferment, which gave you that diversity of flavor and depth of flavor profile that almost like sourdough bread gives you. And then at the end, we blended them together and aged them together in barrel. And it's that whole thing about, diversification gives you, 2 + 2 = 6 with certain things,
Of course.
And so there are loads of things and technologies and scientific advancements about the way yeast works, that grapes works, that oak works, that we're trying to embrace as part of the philosophy of the winery. That isn't often done, but there's one of the things we've done this year is the 2020 vintage, the Sauvignon Blanc we've made from Bordeaux grown grapes. We've used a double yeast, inoculated yeast formation in the juice. And the science shows that if you use these two very, very different yeasts in the juice, it gives you a much more directional, aromatic, tropical taste and aroma profile in the Sauvignon. And again, I just think that the thing that I love is trying to push the boundaries of what's happening in the wine world with really good grapes. But again, without the perspective of tradition and with the idea of making something unique, distinctive, and high quality as the end goal.
Well, I think, what I'm picking up from you guys is that it does always come down to the fruit. You need the quality fruit to start with. And then as a winemaker, it's not an experiment, but it's about having a lot of fun, a lot of freedom, being able to move and to try different things. And, you talk about all these different yeasts and the different ferments and the ability to explore and develop your style, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about Renegade style. We're talking about the input that you have and the winemakers that you employ and the direction that you give them. Warwick, I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you, trying these 3 wines. I can't wait to see what's coming next for you guys. I mean, is there anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Well, the truth is that we currently make too many wines. We do 38,000 bottles and we make about 22 wines a year, which is ludicrous. And the reason is that we work with about 10 different vineyards and about 16 different varieties. And when you've got the whole of Europe and the whole of the UK and the world of wine to play with, it's very hard to make 3 wines. And so we do a range from mum pleaser styles, not very much of that, all the way to divisive styles. We're about to launch a couple of new wines that are made from English grown grapes soon that are on the much more divisive end of the spectrum. One's called Bethnal Bubbles. We've been making it for 3 or 4 years. It's a dry hopped English sparkling. So essentially it's a beer wine hybrid. It's 100% grapes grown in the UK, made into a still wine, hopped with Citra and Mosaic from New Zealand and America, and secondary fermented like a champagne in bottle. Smells like a double dry hopped pale ale, tastes like a sparkling wine. The craft beer world seem to like it. The other one is we've experimented with another infusion. We've made an English sparkling Sauvignon Blanc grown in Essex, and we've aromatized it with an organic Earl Grey tea. So it's champagne method English sparkling with Earl Grey. It's very divisive. It's not a tinge of Earl Grey. It's a smack in the face of Earl Grey. And again, we're just trying to play around, with what. And so one of the reasons behind the use of tea is that often sulfur is often used in winemaking. There's something about tannins, and the tannin content of tea means if you use tea in wine, that actually you can reduce to 0 the use of sulfur. But I mean, these are early days, but But there's loads of stuff coming from the approachable to the ridiculous.
No, so I was going to say that's what it sounds like. You're on a constant exploration of development, trying as much as you can, and it's great that you have the freedom to do that, the ability to do that, and the encouragement and enthusiasm. That's what I'm picking up on most.
Yeah, but and you know why I think, again, so I know you want to wrap this up, but I'm going to keep on talking because I think one of the reasons for that is that because we're not owned by anybody, because we have a lovely customer base, because people trust us and like the product and think we're going to do good stuff and buy the products, we could, as long as you make good stuff, you can play and experiment. And so we're really lucky that there is nobody telling us what to do apart from the direct feedback from our customers. So.
But that's the whole point, is we've mentioned this a few times in the conversation, is your stamp, your opinion, your wines. Where are you positioning yourself? Warwick, that's the perfect way to wrap up. Thank you so much for sending the wines. I've thoroughly enjoyed trying them, tasting them with you, drinking them with you, and hearing you speak. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Guy. Cheers.